The polished mahogany desk gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting of Adriana Blackwood's office, reflecting the meticulously organized stacks of legal briefs. At 22, she was supposed to be a Blackwood princess, destined to inherit a legacy built on shadowed deals and brutal enforcement. Yet as she traced the precise lines of a contract, her mind was a million miles from the intricate legal loopholes designed to shield her family's crimes. She imagined using these very words, this sharp legal acumen, to protect the vulnerable, to carve out justice for those who couldn't fight. It was a silent rebellion, a dream kept hidden deep within her. She was soft, she knew. Her hands, though capable of turning pages with a lawyer's precision, lacked the calloused strength she saw in her uncles, in the men who moved through the Blackwood estate with quiet menace. Her eyes, often described as gentle pools of brown, struggled to maintain the unblinking coldness that her family considered a virtue. She was a rose trying to bloom in a field of thorns, a delicate thing in a world that valued only iron. Every day felt like wearing a mask, performing a role she despised, while beneath it, her spirit yearned for escape. The office itself, with its expensive leather and hushed silence, felt less like a personal space and more like a gilded cage. She could almost feel the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her, an invisible hand guiding her every move, even when they weren't physically present. Her cousin, a constant shadow in the periphery of her life, often passed by her open door, a knowing glance in his eyes that always made her feel observed, assessed. It was a suffocating existence, where every breath she took felt like it had to be approved. Her gaze drifted to a small, chipped espresso cup nestled amongst the pristine office supplies. It was a cheap thing, a souvenir from a forgotten trip, but she kept it there, a tiny, defiant splash of imperfection in a world that demanded flawless control. It was a secret comfort, a reminder of a simpler life she craved. The sudden vibration of her hidden burner phone, tucked discreetly beneath a stack of old files, startled her. Her breath hitched. She knew that sound, that specific, almost silent hum. It was the only way he ever contacted her. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and an undeniable, desperate longing. She glanced instinctively at her door, then at the closed blinds, a primal fear of discovery coiling in her gut. With shaking fingers, she retrieved the device. A single cryptic message flashed across the screen, a time, a place, and nothing more. It was an invitation, a summons to a meeting that could shatter her carefully constructed double life, that could ignite the deadly feud between their families into an inferno. She knew the risks, the brutal consequences of being found out. Yet, as she stared at the glowing words, a different kind of strength surfaced within her, pushing past the fear. It was the thrill of the forbidden, the desperate hope that with him she might find a sanctuary from the violence that defined her world, even if that sanctuary was built on danger. Her hands trembled, but her resolve hardened. She would go. The biting New York air, usually a familiar sting against her cheeks, felt sharper, colder, as Adriana navigated the labyrinthine back alleys of Little Italy. She hugged her coat tighter, not against the chill, but against the tremor that ran through her. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the urgent pulse of her anticipation and fear. The address was nondescript, a forgotten door tucked between overflowing dumpsters and graffiti-scarred brick. It was the kind of place designed to be overlooked, a perfect hideout. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into menacing shapes. She peered over her shoulder constantly, her breath catching in her throat with every distant siren, every muffled laugh from a nearby bar. This was a world she knew in theory, a world her family thrived in, but one she tried desperately to avoid. Now, she was walking straight into its heart, into the territory of their most feared rival. Just as her fingers brushed the cold metal of the door handle, a deeper shadow detached itself from the wall beside her. Adriana gasped. A choked sound caught in her throat, her entire body freezing. He was there, Nikolai Russo. His presence was immediate, overwhelming, a solid, unyielding force that devoured the dim light around them. He was taller, broader than she remembered, a hulking figure that seemed to fill the narrow alleyway, making her feel impossibly small, fragile. His eyes, dark as midnight and just as unreadable, met hers. There was no warmth, only a cold, strategic intensity that made her instinctively want to retreat. But then, a flicker, a possessive glint that seemed to snag her breath in her lungs and hold it captive. He didn't speak, didn't ask. Instead, his large hand closed around her arm, a grip that wasn't violent, but undeniably controlling. It was a silent claim, a declaration. His touch, firm and warm, sent an unexpected jolt through her, a strange mix of apprehension and a nascent sense of being anchored. She had no choice but to follow. He guided her through the nondescript door, down a narrow, dimly lit hallway that smelled of old spices and something vaguely metallic. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by a profound silence that pressed in on her. He led her up a creaking wooden staircase, then through another heavy door, finally into a room that was clearly a sanctuary. It was hidden, private, almost entirely cut off from the world outside, its windows thick with blackout curtains. This wasn't just a meeting place, it was a fortress, built solely for their clandestine encounters. Nikolai released her arm only to reach into his coat. He pulled out a length of fabric, a luxurious red silk scarf, deep and rich in color. Her eyes widened, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. She knew what it was for. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic protest. "For your safety," he said, his voice a low rumble, deep and resonant, vibrating through the quiet room. It held no question, only a calm, unwavering command. "To ensure our secret remains ours." His words, despite their ominous implication, were strangely reassuring. Her own family's world was built on secrets, but they were secrets that often led to betrayal and death. His secret, he implied, was a shield. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement as he lifted the scarf. He paused, his gaze fixed on her, acknowledging her hesitation without softening his resolve. His fingers were long and strong as he gently yet firmly tied the silk around her head, covering her eyes. Darkness descended, absolute and immediate. Her other senses sharpened. She felt the soft brush of the silk against her skin, the subtle scent of his cologne, cedar and something sharp, like steel, enveloping her. She felt his proximity, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint rustle of his clothes as he moved. A primal instinct, deeper than fear, urged her to submit, to yield to this overwhelming presence. "These meetings," his voice resonated through the darkness closer now, "will be on my terms, Adriana, under my protection." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, a decree. And in that absolute darkness, stripped of her sight, of her perceived control, Adriana felt a strange paradox. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it, a profound and unfamiliar sense of safety began to bloom. It was the safety of relinquishing control, of trusting in a power far greater than her own to navigate the dangerous currents of their forbidden world. He would protect her. He would command. And she, for the first time in her life, felt a desperate, undeniable urge to obey. Each meeting began the same way. A ritual Adriana had slowly, surprisingly, come to anticipate. The tremor in her hands as she neared the hidden door, the sharp intake of breath, as Nikolai's formidable presence materialized from the shadows, his hand finding her arm with that familiar possessive grip. He would lead her up the creaking stairs, the scent of cedar and steel clinging to him, and then the red silk scarf would descend, soft and absolute, plunging her into darkness. What had once been a terrifying act of submission now felt like a deliberate shedding of her public self, a quiet surrender that strangely brought with it a profound sense of safety. Once the blindfold was removed, she would find herself in the hidden room above the restaurant, their sanctuary. It was sparsely furnished, but always meticulously clean, the air hushed, almost reverent. Sometimes she would catch glimpses of his men, hulking shadows in the periphery, moving with a silent, practiced efficiency that spoke volumes of their unwavering loyalty to Nikolai. They were extensions of his will, silent guardians, and their presence, rather than making her feel watched, deepened her sense of inviolable protection. Here, within these walls, a different kind of calm settled over her, a stark contrast to the unsettling tension that always vibrated beneath the surface of her own family's opulent compound. No hidden eyes, no whispered judgments, just the quiet assurance of his watchful power. Nikolai, in these moments, was a study in controlled intensity. He would sit opposite her, his dark eyes never leaving her face, and he would question her, not with idle curiosity, but with a precise, almost clinical interest in the details of her day. Where had she been? Who had she spoken to? Had anything unusual happened? It wasn't a casual conversation, it was an interrogation, born of a ruthless need to identify and neutralize any potential threat to her. She never questioned his right to ask, only found herself willingly detailing every innocuous interaction, every subtle shift in her routine. There was a profound comfort in his unwavering control, in his absolute determination to keep her safe. It was a burden lifted, a responsibility she happily relinquished, knowing he would carry it with formidable strength. One evening, after their usual quiet exchange, Nikolai didn't just remove her blindfold and prepare to escort her out. Instead, he took her hand, his touch firm and guiding, and led her to another door, one she hadn't noticed before. He opened it, revealing a narrow set of steps leading upwards. The cool night air, mixed with the damp scent of soil, greeted her. He led her onto a small, hidden rooftop garden. It was an unexpected haven amidst the concrete jungle, wild and beautiful, a testament to something carefully tended. Ivy clung to crumbling brick, and potted herbs released their fragrance into the night. Under the faint glow of distant city lights, a single white rose stood sentinel in an old, chipped wine bottle. It was a fragile beauty, starkly out of place, yet perfectly at home in this secret world, a delicate thing cherished in his harsh existence. He released her hand, but his presence remained a warm, protective wall behind her. Adriana gazed at the rose, at the unexpected softness in his domain, and understood. This garden, this rose, was a symbol of her, carefully guarded, intensely valued. She was the fragile beauty he chose to shelter, to nurture, even amidst the brutal realities of his life. And in that moment, standing on a hidden rooftop, under his silent, watchful gaze, Adriana felt not just safe, but utterly cherished. Completely his. The hidden rooftop garden, bathed in the soft, diffused light of the city, became their most cherished secret within a world of secrets. Here, amidst the fragrant herbs and the sturdy white rose, Adriana found a fragile peace. It was in these quiet moments that the layers of her carefully constructed defenses began to peel away, revealing the tender truth beneath. She spoke of her days, not just the mundane details Nikolai demanded, but the deeper longing within her. "I don't want to just shield crimes," she confessed one evening, her voice barely a whisper against the hum of the city. She watched his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes as he listened, unmoving. "I want to use the law to protect people, to build something real, something good." Her voice trembled slightly, revealing the raw vulnerability of her dream. She spoke of the revulsion she felt for the Blackwood family's endless cycle of violence, the sickening weight of the legacy she was meant to inherit. It was a confession she had never dared utter to anyone, not even to herself, so explicitly. Nikolai didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering, dissecting her words, her expressions. And in that intense, silent observation, Adriana felt profoundly seen, truly understood, in a way that was both terrifying and utterly liberating. He didn't judge her softness, her idealism. He simply absorbed it, his presence a solid, unyielding anchor in the face of her confessions. When she finished, a heavy silence settled between them. Then Nikolai shifted, turning fully towards her. His voice, when he spoke, was low and deliberate, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Your dreams are your own, Adriana, but your safety, that is mine to command." His hand reached out, not to touch, but to gesture. A subtle sweep that encompassed the city below, the hidden garden, their very existence. The world outside these walls. It is not kind. Especially to those who bear your name, and to those who are seen with mine. He began to lay out his terms, a series of precise, unbending rules for her public life. You will not travel alone, ever. You will avoid all unscheduled meetings. You will not engage in conversations with strangers, no matter how innocent they seem. Your phone, your movements, your interactions, all will be monitored. You will speak only what is necessary, reveal nothing of our association or anything that could be leveraged against either of us. Her breath hitched, a flicker of her old rebellion, a protest against the complete intrusion into her autonomy stirred within her. She was a lawyer, an independent woman, not a pawn to be moved. She wanted to argue, to demand her freedom. But then she met his gaze. There was no room for negotiation, no softening in his dark eyes. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decree, issued with the chilling certainty of a man who knew the true cost of compromise. "This isn't a request," he reiterated, as if sensing her internal struggle. "It is for your protection, Adriana. Every one of these rules is a shield against what waits to devour you." He spoke of the escalating tensions between their families, the brutal war that simmered beneath the city's surface, always threatening to erupt. He hinted at the ruthlessness of his world, a world where alliances were temporary and betrayal was a constant shadow. He didn't elaborate on the specifics, but the cold, hard glint in his eyes was enough. It was a stark contrast to her gentle nature, to her dreams of justice. His words painted a picture of a predatory existence, making his protective measures feel less like shackles and more like a necessary fortress, an ironclad defense against the unseen dangers that constantly circled. "Your family," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They would use you, without hesitation. They would sacrifice you, Adriana, to gain an inch of ground, to crush me." The words struck her with a chilling, undeniable truth. She knew it. She had felt it, in the subtle manipulations, the unspoken expectations, the way her life was always framed as a tool for the Blackwood dynasty. Her own family, the people who were supposed to cherish her, would gladly throw her into the fire if it served their ambition. It was a horrifying realization, but one that solidified her burgeoning trust in Nikolai. He didn't hide the darkness. He simply declared his intention to stand between her and its consuming flames. In that moment, the fear of his control paled in comparison to the fear of the world without it. She accepted his demands, not with resignation, but with a profound, almost desperate gratitude. He was her protector, her shelter, her only certainty. The hidden rooftop garden, bathed in the soft, diffused light of the city, became their most cherished secret within a world of secrets. Here, amidst the fragrant herbs and the sturdy white rose, Adriana found a fragile peace. It was in these quiet moments that the layers of her carefully constructed defenses began to peel away, revealing the tender truth beneath. She spoke of her days, not just the mundane details Nikolai demanded, but the deeper longing within her. "I don't want to just shield crimes," she confessed one evening, her voice barely a whisper against the hum of the city. She watched his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes as he listened, unmoving. "I want to use the law to protect people, to build something real, something good." Her voice trembled slightly, revealing the raw vulnerability of her dream. She spoke of the revulsion she felt for the Blackwood family's endless cycle of violence, the sickening weight of the legacy she was meant to inherit. It was a confession she had never dared utter to anyone, not even to herself so explicitly. Nikolai didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering, dissecting her words, her expressions. And in that intense, silent observation, Adriana felt profoundly seen, truly understood, in a way that was both terrifying and utterly liberating. He didn't judge her softness, her idealism. He simply absorbed it, his presence a solid, unyielding anchor in the face of her confessions. When she finished, a heavy silence settled between them. Then Nikolai shifted, turning fully towards her. His voice, when he spoke, was low and deliberate, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Your dreams are your own, Adriana, but your safety, that is mine to command." His hand reached out, not to touch, but to gesture, a subtle sweep that encompassed the city below, the hidden garden, their very existence. The world outside these walls. It is not kind, especially to those who bear your name, and to those who are seen with mine. He began to lay out his terms, a series of precise, unbending rules for her public life. You will not travel alone, ever. You will avoid all unscheduled meetings. You will not engage in conversations with strangers, no matter how innocent they seem. Your phone, your movements, your interactions, all will be monitored. You will speak only what is necessary, reveal nothing of our association or anything that could be leveraged against either of us. Her breath hitched. A flicker of her old rebellion, a protest against the complete intrusion into her autonomy, stirred within her. She was a lawyer, an independent woman, not a pawn to be moved. She wanted to argue, to demand her freedom. But then she met his gaze. There was no room for negotiation, no softening in his dark eyes. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decree, issued with the chilling certainty of a man who knew the true cost of compromise. "This isn't a request," he reiterated, as if sensing her internal struggle. "It is for your protection, Adriana. Every one of these rules is a shield against what waits to devour you." He spoke of the escalating tensions between their families, the brutal war that simmered beneath the city's surface, always threatening to erupt. He hinted at the ruthlessness of his world, a world where alliances were temporary and betrayal was a constant shadow. He didn't elaborate on the specifics, but the cold, hard glint in his eyes was enough. It was a stark contrast to her gentle nature, to her dreams of justice. His words painted a picture of a predatory existence, making his protective measures feel less like shackles and more like a necessary fortress, an ironclad defense against the unseen dangers that constantly circled. "Your family," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They would use you. Without hesitation, they would sacrifice you, Adriana, to gain an inch of ground, to crush me. The words struck her with a chilling, undeniable truth. She knew it, she had felt it, in the subtle manipulations, the unspoken expectations, the way her life was always framed as a tool for the Blackwood dynasty. Her own family, the people who were supposed to cherish her, would gladly throw her into the fire if it served their ambition. It was a horrifying realization, but one that solidified her burgeoning trust in Nikolai. He didn't hide the darkness. He simply declared his intention to stand between her and its consuming flames. In that moment, the fear of his control paled in comparison to the fear of the world without it. She accepted his demands, not with resignation, but with a profound, almost desperate gratitude. He was her protector, her shelter, her only certainty. The Blackwood estate was a glittering cage, especially during family gatherings. Chandeliers dripped crystal light onto marble floors, and the air hummed with forced joviality, a thin veneer over currents of ambition and unspoken threats. Adriana moved through the opulent rooms like a ghost, her soft dress a stark contrast to the sharp suits and predatory gazes of her male relatives. She tried to make herself small, to blend into the rich tapestries and polished wood, hoping to avoid the casual cruelty that often punctuated these obligatory events. Her legal mind, however, was a restless thing, always observing, always connecting the fragments of conversation that floated through the air. She found a quiet corner near the library, pretending to admire a collection of ancient, unread books. Her uncle, a man whose smile never reached his cold eyes, was holding court in a nearby alcove, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He was one of the Blackwood family's most ruthless capos, a man whose hands, Adriana knew, had orchestrated countless acts of violence. She tried to tune him out, to focus on the intricate bindings of a leather-bound volume, but a phrase caught her attention, sharp and clear above the murmur of other voices. Clean, precise, no witnesses. Adriana's breath hitched. Her gaze flickered to her uncle. He was leaning back in his chair, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Casually, almost absently, he rotated a heavy gold ring on his finger. It bore the Blackwood family crest, intricate and menacing. But what truly caught her eye was the faint, almost imperceptible discoloration on its surface, a dark stain that looked suspiciously like dried blood. It was a chilling reminder of the violence that was her family's true legacy, a legacy she wanted no part of. Then his next words landed like a physical blow. Russo, Nikolai himself. Her blood ran cold. The air in her lungs seemed to turn to ice. Nikolai, her protector, her world, which had felt so securely anchored by his presence, now lurched violently. Her uncle continued, detailing the plan with a chilling dispassion, outlining the exact location, the timing, the methods. It was a brutal hit, designed for absolute certainty, irreversible. He spoke of it as if discussing a business deal, not the murder of a man. The cold, strategic precision of it all made her stomach clench. A wave of nausea washed over her, real and immediate. This wasn't just a threat. It was a death sentence, coldly calculated, and she was the only one who knew. The thought of Nikolai, powerful as he was, walking into such a trap, made a desperate, primal fear erupt in her chest. All the safety she felt under his protection, all the solace she found in his demanding embrace, suddenly depended entirely on her. She had to warn him, now. Feigning a sudden violent headache, Adriana excused herself from the gathering, her voice thin and reedy. Her cousin, ever watchful, gave her a brief, assessing glance, but allowed her to pass. She practically fled to her private rooms, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock the door. Once inside, she ripped off her uncomfortable shoes and stumbled to her bedside table, fumbling for the hidden drawer. Her burner phone, the anonymous device Nikolai had provided, was there. Her fingers trembled so badly she almost dropped it. Her mind raced, sifting through the coded messages they had established. The emergency channels. She had to be careful, absolutely untraceable. Her own family's surveillance was everywhere, a constant unseen net. But Nikolai had given her away, a secure, encrypted link that bypassed everything. She typed furiously, her focus absolute, every ounce of her being concentrated on getting the message through. Target, Russo, uncle, name. Details follow. She kept it brief. Vital information only, praying it would be enough. Fear for herself, the terrifying consequences if her family ever discovered her betrayal, was a distant hum compared to the overwhelming, desperate need to protect him. Nikolai had promised to shield her, to command her safety. Now it was her turn to warn him, to be the shield, however fragile, that saved him from the dark machinations of her own blood. Her message sent, she collapsed onto the bed, breathless, utterly drained, but with a fierce, unwavering resolve. She had done what she could. The war had begun. The warning, a desperate series of keystrokes sent into the digital void, left Adriana feeling hollowed out, suspended in a terrifying limbo. Every shadow that danced outside her window, every distant siren's wail, seemed to carry the weight of impending doom. She had acted on instinct, driven by a primal need to protect him, but now the enormity of her betrayal, the sheer audacity of her defiance against her own blood, settled over her like a suffocating shroud. She jumped at every sound, her nerves frayed, waiting for the inevitable hammer to fall, for her family to discover her treason. But the summons that finally came was not from her father, nor her uncle. It was from Nikolai. His message was succinct, a single, unadorned command. Now, sanctuary. There was no question mark, no softening. It was a declaration, a demand that brooked no argument. A tremor ran through her, a mix of fear and a strange, almost exhilarating relief. He knew. He was calling for her. Her journey to their hidden room above the restaurant felt different this time. The city air seemed colder, sharper, charged with an unseen energy. She saw more shadows than usual, more figures lingering in the periphery, their eyes unnervingly watchful. When she reached the familiar back entrance, Nikolai was already there, not emerging from the darkness, but simply there, a formidable silhouette against the dim light. His presence was immediate, overwhelming, radiating an intensity that made her instinctively flinch. His face was a mask of cold fury, a stark, terrifying tableau that wiped away any trace of the controlled calm she usually saw. His jaw was clenched, his eyes like chips of obsidian, hard and unforgiving. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her fear. Instead, his large hand closed around her arm, a grip more intense, more possessive than ever before. It wasn't violent, but it was absolute, a powerful anchor in a world suddenly teetering on the brink. She felt the raw power in him, a coiled fury barely contained, and a shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He led her through the labyrinthine passages, up the creaking stairs, and into their sanctuary. This time, the red silk scarf was not produced. The darkness was not for concealment, it was for clarity. He released her arm only when they stood in the center of the room, his towering presence dominating the space. "Your message." His voice was a low growl, rough with barely suppressed anger. It was precise, and it was timely. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "Your uncle's plan was put into motion, but because of you, Adriana, it failed, miserably." A gasp escaped her lips, a mix of horror and a profound, dizzying relief. He was safe. Her warning had worked. But then, the weight of his next words settled over her. "What you did," he continued, his voice hardening, "it has consequences. Your warning has triggered an all-out war. It has begun, Adriana, the Blackwoods and the Russos. There is no turning back now." Her stomach dropped, a cold dread washing over her. She had seen the war coming, felt its whispers in the city's underbelly, but to hear it declared, to know she was the catalyst, was a heavy burden. Yet even as fear threatened to consume her, She saw the unwavering resolve in Nikolai's eyes. He wasn't afraid. He was prepared. Because of her. "You will not leave my immediate guarded protection," he declared, his voice dropping to a tone of absolute command. "Not for a moment, not an inch." He gestured vaguely, a subtle movement that conveyed the full extent of his power. "Every route, every rendezvous point, every path you might take is now a fortress. My men are everywhere. They will shadow you, protect you, even when you are with your own family." The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was no longer just his secret. She was his prisoner, shielded by his impenetrable will. The thought should have terrified her, should have sparked a fierce rebellion against the loss of her freedom. But instead, as she gazed at the formidable man before her, at the raw power that emanated from him, an absolute, unwavering trust bloomed in her chest. She had inadvertently sparked a brutal war, but she was not alone. She was under his command, under his formidable protection. His strength, his decisiveness, were her only anchors in the swirling chaos she had unleashed. She felt a profound, almost desperate need to yield, to relinquish all control into his capable hands. The fear of the war, the fear of her family's wrath, receded into a dull hum. All that mattered was him, his presence, his absolute certainty. She stepped closer, her softness yielding to his strength, and without conscious thought, she melted into his protection, finding an unexpected, terrifying, yet utterly perfect solace in his ironclad embrace. He would fight for her, he would command her safety, and she, in turn, would obey. The city beyond the thick, soundproofed walls of Nikolai's safe house was a relentless symphony of sirens and grim news reports. Explosions rattled the distant skyline, and the hushed whispers of escalating violence permeated every conversation, even within the confines of their sanctuary. Adriana, confined almost entirely to these secure locations or the hidden rooms above the restaurant, felt the city's pulse of war, but always through a filter of impenetrable protection. She watched the news with a detached horror, a world she knew intellectually, but was now shielded from physically. Nikolai moved through these spaces with an almost terrifying grace, a constant vortex of strategic thought and ruthless efficiency. She would watch him, mesmerized, as he managed his empire with cold precision. He was always on the phone, his voice a low, commanding rumble, issuing orders, assessing threats, shifting forces. His dark eyes, though often fixed on a map or a screen, would periodically sweep over her, a silent check, a reaffirmation of her safety within his orbit. He never truly let her out of his sight, even when his attention was consumed by the brutal realities of the war. Her every need, every comfort, was anticipated and met with quiet efficiency by his men, all under his silent command. He was a force constantly anticipating, always one step ahead, a formidable bulwark against the chaos outside. In this constant encompassing protection, Adriana found a profound and unexpected solace. The weight of decisions, of navigating a treacherous world, had been lifted entirely from her shoulders. She no longer had to strategize, to pretend, to fear. She simply existed under his absolute command, and in that relinquishment of control, she thrived. Her vulnerability, her very softness, which had always felt like a weakness in her family's world, now seemed to deepen his protective fervor, making him even more watchful, more possessive. She was his, and he would not let anything touch her. It was a terrifying, yet utterly intoxicating surrender. One night, the quiet hum of the safe house was violently shattered. A sudden, jarring impact vibrated through the floor, followed by the muffled thud of heavy boots and a distant, sharp report. Adriana gasped, her body tensing, her heart leaping into her throat. Nikolai, who had been reviewing documents at a table across the room, was on his feet in an instant, his movements fluid and swift. He didn't hesitate. He simply moved, sweeping her behind him with an arm of iron, pushing her towards an inner reinforced room. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion, but laced with an undeniable urgency that compelled her immediate obedience. "Do not move." The door clanged shut, thick and heavy, plunging her into a dim, almost airless space. She pressed her ear to the cold metal, straining to hear. The sounds of conflict were muted but unmistakable. Shouts, the frantic scuffle of feet, more muffled impacts. It was a direct attempt, she realized, to infiltrate their sanctuary, to reach her. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her, but it was quickly followed by an unshakable belief. Nikolai was out there. He would handle it. Minutes stretched into an eternity. She heard the distant, controlled bursts of gunfire, the harsh commands of Nikolai's men, then a profound, unsettling silence. When the heavy door finally reopened, it was Nikolai, standing tall and unyielding in the doorway. His clothes were uncreased, his expression unreadable, but a faint scent of gunpowder clung to him, a chilling testament to the violence he had just repelled. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes scanning her face, ensuring she was unharmed. No words were needed. In that moment, Adriana understood, with a conviction that settled deep into her bones, that he was truly impenetrable. She had witnessed the violence, heard its echoes, but she had been utterly shielded. She was his shelter, yes, but he was her unyielding shield, an immovable force between her and the brutal world. She walked out of the room, not with hesitation, but with a renewed, absolute trust, stepping back into the encompassing safety of his presence, entirely content to exist under his formidable command. The brutal war Adriana had inadvertently triggered now raged across the city, a relentless, all-consuming fire. News reports whispered of shattered alliances, of territories fiercely contested, of a new, terrifying era dawning in the underworld. Adriana felt its distant tremors, even within the impenetrable walls of Nikolai's safe houses. She knew she was bait, a prize both families would gladly sacrifice or seize to gain an advantage. This knowledge, rather than paralyzing her, simply deepened her dependence on Nikolai, making his overwhelming presence her only reality. Nikolai's protection, already absolute, became even more encompassing. He rarely slept, his dark eyes perpetually vigilant, his mind a labyrinth of strategies and counter-strategies. Yet even amidst the relentless demands of a city-wide conflict, he always made time for her. He would find her in the hidden rooftop garden or in the quiet comfort of their sanctuary, and for those stolen moments his focus would narrow, becoming entirely, possessively hers. He would sit close, his large hand often resting on her knee or brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, a silent testament to her place as his sole priority. In those moments, the raging war outside faded, and her world felt smaller, contained, safe within the formidable shadow he cast. But even in the safety of his arms, a disquieting whisper began to stir within Adriana. Isolated from her normal life, forced to confront the brutal truths of her family's world, she started to look back. Bits and pieces of her past, once dismissed as harmless eccentricities, now clicked into place with an unsettling clarity. She remembered discrepancies in stories her father told about the feud's origins, subtle shifts in his narrative over the years, almost imperceptible at the time, but glaringly obvious now. There were strange behaviors from her mother too, a sudden, uncharacteristic fear in her eyes after certain family meetings. A hushed phone call always cut short when Adriana entered the room. These fleeting memories, once buried, resurfaced like ghosts, hinting that the generations-old rivalry, the very foundation of her family's power, might be built on something far darker, far more treacherous than mere animosity. She began to suspect her family's feuds ran deeper, darker than she could have ever imagined. One afternoon, her cousin, who had managed to slip past Nikolai's outer layers of security for a rare, supervised visit, found her in the library of one of Nikolai's secure residences. He had always been the sympathetic ear, the one who understood her quiet rebellion. "You look distant, Adriana," he said, his voice soft, full of concern. He sat opposite her, his gaze seemingly gentle. "This war, it's taking its toll. You're trapped." Adriana hesitated, then, drawn by his familiar comfort, she allowed herself to confide. "It's more than the war," she admitted, her voice low. "It's my family, things my father said, things my mother did. It doesn't add up. It feels like there's something else, something hidden beneath all the violence." She spoke of her unease, the growing suspicion that her past was a carefully constructed lie. Her cousin listened intently, nodding. He reached across the table, his hand briefly covering hers in a gesture of shared understanding. "You're right to question them," he whispered, his eyes earnest. "They're ruthless. You need to be able to protect yourself, even from them." Then, subtly, his tone shifted. "Nikolai, he's powerful, yes, but how does he keep you so safe? His methods, are they truly impenetrable? If you ever needed to escape, to make a move of your own, how would you even begin?" He probed gently, his questions framed as concern for her potential future autonomy, for her ability to navigate this danger if Nikolai were ever compromised. What are his blind spots, his routines? Adriana, still trusting in his concern, offered vague insights. She spoke of the multiple layers of guards, the encrypted communications, the way Nikolai anticipated threats. She mentioned the hidden passages, the specific times he was most focused on strategy. She saw it as sharing information with an ally, someone who genuinely cared. She was still under the umbrella of Nikolai's formidable protection, but a new layer of vulnerability had unknowingly been exposed, a subtle thread of information woven into the seemingly safe tapestry of her trust. She found a strange comfort in her cousin's presence, a familiar echo from her past, unaware that his kindness was merely another trap, carefully baited, and that the seeds of doubt she had shared were being meticulously harvested for a darker purpose. The brutal war Adriana had inadvertently triggered now raged across the city, a relentless, all-consuming fire. News reports whispered of shattered alliances, of territories fiercely contested, of a new, terrifying era dawning in the underworld. Adriana felt its distant tremors even within the impenetrable walls of Nikolai's safe houses. She knew she was bait, a prize both families would gladly sacrifice or seize to gain an advantage. This knowledge, rather than paralyzing her, simply deepened her dependence on Nikolai, making his overwhelming presence her only reality. Nikolai's protection, already absolute, became even more encompassing. He rarely slept, his dark eyes perpetually vigilant, his mind a labyrinth of strategies and counter-strategies. Yet, even amidst the relentless demands of a citywide conflict, he always made time for her. He would find her in the hidden rooftop garden or in the quiet comfort of their sanctuary, and for those stolen moments his focus would narrow, becoming entirely possessively hers. He would sit close, his large hand often resting on her knee or brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, a silent testament to her place as his sole priority. In those moments, the raging war outside faded, and her world felt smaller, contained, safe within the formidable shadow he cast. But even in the safety of his arms, a disquieting whisper began to stir within Adriana. Isolated from her normal life, forced to confront the brutal truths of her family's world, she started to look back. Bits and pieces of her past, once dismissed as harmless eccentricities, now clicked into place with an unsettling clarity. She remembered discrepancies in stories her father told about the feud's origins, subtle shifts in his narrative over the years, almost imperceptible at the time, but glaringly obvious now. There were strange behaviors from her mother, too, a sudden, uncharacteristic fear in her eyes after certain family meetings. A hushed phone call always cut short when Adriana entered the room. These fleeting memories, once buried, resurfaced like ghosts, hinting that the generations-old rivalry, the very foundation of her family's power, might be built on something far darker, far more treacherous than mere animosity. She began to suspect her family's feuds ran deeper, darker, than she could have ever imagined. One afternoon, her cousin, who had managed to slip past Nikolai's outer layers of security for a rare, supervised visit, found her in the library of one of Nikolai's secure residences. He had always been the sympathetic ear, the one who understood her quiet rebellion. "You look distant, Adriana," he said, his voice soft, full of concern. He sat opposite her, his gaze seemingly gentle. "This war, it's taking its toll. You're trapped." Adriana hesitated, then, drawn by his familiar comfort, she allowed herself to confide. "It's more than the war," she admitted, her voice low. "It's my family. Things my father said, things my mother did. It doesn't add up. It feels like there's something else, something hidden beneath all the violence." She spoke of her unease, the growing suspicion that her past was a carefully constructed lie. Her cousin listened intently, nodding. He reached across the table, his hand briefly covering hers in a gesture of shared understanding. "You're right to question them," he whispered, his eyes earnest. "They're ruthless. You need to be able to protect yourself, even from them." Then, subtly, his tone shifted. "Nikolai. He's powerful, yes. But how does he keep you so safe? His methods, are they truly impenetrable? If you ever needed to escape, to make a move of your own, how would you even begin?" He probed gently, his questions framed as concern for her potential future autonomy, for her ability to navigate this danger if Nikolai were ever compromised. What are his blind spots, his routines? Adriana, still trusting in his concern, offered vague insights. She spoke of the multiple layers of guards, the encrypted communications, the way Nikolai anticipated threats. She mentioned the hidden passages, the specific times he was most focused on strategy. She saw it as sharing information with an ally, someone who genuinely cared. She was still under the umbrella of Nikolai's formidable protection, but a new layer of vulnerability had unknowingly been exposed. A subtle thread of information woven into the seemingly safe tapestry of her trust. She found a strange comfort in her cousin's presence, a familiar echo from her past, unaware that his kindness was merely another trap, carefully baited, and that the seeds of doubt she had shared were being meticulously harvested for a darker purpose. The unease festered within Adriana, a persistent, gnawing suspicion that refused to be silenced. The fragments of memory, the discrepancies in her father's stories, the fear in her mother's eyes, they coalesced into a chilling portrait of betrayal, a hidden truth that felt far more menacing than the open warfare raging outside. She found herself watching Nikolai with a new intensity, his cold, strategic gaze now seeming to hold answers she desperately needed. Her cousin's questions, seemingly innocent, now echoed in her mind with a different, more unsettling resonance. She needed the truth, a true accounting of the generations-old feud that had consumed both their families. One evening, in the hushed intimacy of their sanctuary, Adriana found the courage she needed. Nikolai was at his table, a map spread before him, his fingers tracing lines of demarcation, planning his next move. He was a formidable figure, radiating power and strategic brilliance. Her heart pounded, a familiar rhythm of apprehension and longing. "Nikolai," she began, her voice barely a whisper, yet firm with a resolve born of desperation. He paused, his head turning slowly, his dark eyes fixing on her, There was no impatience in his gaze, only a deep, unwavering scrutiny that saw past her fear to the profound need beneath. He recognized her unwavering loyalty, the depth of her trust, and understood that this was not a challenge, but a plea. He put down his pen, his large hands resting flat on the map, a silent invitation for her to speak. "The feud," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "my family's history, it doesn't make sense. There are too many holes, too many lies." She looked at him, her gaze pleading for honesty. "Tell me, what really happened? The massacre, years ago. What truly started it?" Nikolai's eyes narrowed, a profound understanding dawning in their depths. He pushed himself away from the table, rising to his full height, then walked slowly towards her. His presence was immediate, overwhelming, yet she did not flinch. He stopped before her, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders, a warm, firm anchor. "Your father," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of years of hidden truths. "He orchestrated the worst of it, the massacre you speak of." Adriana gasped. A choked sound. Her father, not his. Her breath caught in her throat, a cold dread twisting in her stomach. "It wasn't for family honor," Nikolai continued, his gaze piercing, "not for territory alone. It was to hide his own betrayal, a massive financial gain leveraged against both families. He played us against each other, Adriana. He betrayed everyone." The words landed like physical blows, each one shattering a piece of her carefully constructed world. Her father, the man who was supposed to be her protector, her patriarch, was a betrayer, a monster who had sacrificed countless lives for his own greed. The illusions, the last remnants of her faith in her family, crumbled into dust. A profound sense of loss, of sickening disillusionment washed over her, leaving her feeling hollowed out, untethered. His hands tightened on her shoulders, a comforting pressure that held her steady as her world spun. "And my father," Nikolai continued, his voice softer now, a hint of something deeper, almost regretful in its tone. "He was a cruel man. He gave vicious orders, orders that would have killed innocents." He paused, his gaze searching hers, as if measuring her capacity to understand. "I sabotaged them. For years, I found ways to blunt their edges, to prevent unnecessary bloodshed." Adriana stared at him, unable to comprehend. This feared prince, this ruthless strategist, had been secretly protecting innocents. "Your mother," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "she was on his list once. An unfortunate connection. A loose end. I made sure that order was never carried out." Her breath hitched again, but this time it was not from fear, but from a revelation so profound it stole her voice. He had protected her mother, even before he knew her. A wave of raw emotion, of gratitude and awe washed over Adriana. The formidable man before her, the one whose power both intimidated and captivated her, possessed a hidden goodness, an integrity that transcended the brutal world he inhabited. He wasn't just protective of her, he was always, fundamentally, a protector. She leaned into his touch, her softness yielding completely to his formidable strength. The devastation of her family's betrayal was immense, but it was countered by an even greater truth. Nikolai was her anchor, her only truth in a world of lies. He had shattered her illusions, but in doing so, he had bound her to him with an unbreakable devotion. The safety she felt in his presence was no longer just physical. It was the profound, emotional safety of finally knowing the truth, shared with the only man she could ever trust. He was not just her protector, he was her moral compass, her unwavering shield against the darkness, and she was utterly, completely, irrevocably his. The world, once a shifting landscape of half-truths and unspoken dangers, had become a stark, brutal canvas after Nikolai's revelations. Her father, a betrayer. Her family, a construct of lies built on innocent blood. Adriana walked through the hushed rooms of Nikolai's safe house like a sleepwalker, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. Yet amidst the shattering of her past, a new, fierce clarity had emerged. Nikolai. He was the unwavering truth, the formidable anchor in her storm. He had shown her the darkness, but he had also shown her his own hidden integrity, his quiet acts of protection, even for her mother. Her devotion to him, once a fragile blossom, had hardened into something unshakable, an absolute certainty. But there was one last thread, one last fragile hope from her past she needed to confront. Her cousin. He had been the sympathetic ear, the one who had seemed to understand her quiet rebellion, her revulsion for their family's violence. He had always offered a comforting word, a shared glance of disapproval at her uncle's ruthlessness. He had even, just days ago, seemed to probe her for information about Nikolai's security, ostensibly for her own protection. She found him in one of the less guarded areas of the safe house, where he was permitted supervised visits. He looked up, his face breaking into a familiar, reassuring smile. "Adriana, you look shaken. The war, it's truly upon us now." His words, once comforting, now felt hollow, grating. Adriana's gaze, usually soft, was steady, unflinching. "I know the truth, cousin," she said, her voice low, trembling slightly but firm. "About father, about the massacre, about everything." The smile on his face faltered, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. His eyes, which had always seemed so kind, now held a chilling composure, a calculation she had never noticed before. He didn't gasp, didn't recoil in shock. Instead, a slow, knowing smirk spread across his lips, devoid of warmth. The mask had finally dropped. "Ah," he murmured, his voice losing its practiced softness, becoming sharper, colder. "So he told you, Nikolai. He always was a bit too honest for his own good, though useful in his own way." He leaned back, his arms crossing, a predatory gleam entering his eyes. "You see, Adriana, everyone has their price, and everyone has their game." Her breath hitched, a cold dread twisting in her stomach. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, though she already knew, a sickening certainty blooming in her chest. "I'm talking about leverage," he said, his voice dripping with casual cruelty. "Your father, he was a fool, a short-sighted brute. Nikolai, he's a lion, but a predictable one, obsessed with keeping what's his." He gestured vaguely, encompassing her. "And you, my dear cousin, you are the perfect pawn. To both of them." He revealed it all without a hint of remorse. He had been playing both sides, a meticulously crafted dance of deception. He fed snippets of information about Adriana's movements, her routines, her growing attachment to Nikolai, to her father, knowing it would fuel the Blackwood's rage and desperation. And he fed equally enticing, carefully curated details about the Blackwoods' plans, their vulnerabilities, their perceived advantages, to Nikolai's network. He had been creating the chaos, escalating the war, all for a massive cut, a greater share of power and wealth that would fall to him when the dust settled. He was an architect of the very destruction she had tried so desperately to escape. "You were so easy to read," he chuckled, a harsh, grating sound, always so earnest, so naive. "You wanted to believe I cared. You wanted to believe there was some goodness left in our family. It made you sloppy. It made you useful." The betrayal was absolute, a final brutal severing. Her family, her trusted cousin, all were corrupt. All had used her, manipulated her, seen her only as a means to an end. The last vestiges of her past, of her identity as a Blackwood, crumbled into dust, leaving her feeling adrift, utterly alone. A profound sense of loss, sharp and agonizing, washed over her, but beneath it a strange, fierce relief. There was no more pretense, no more hope for a past that never truly existed. Then a large, familiar hand settled on her shoulder, firm and possessive. Nikolai. He had entered silently, his presence immediately dominating the room, his eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed on her cousin. He had heard. He knew. "You thought you were clever." Nikolai's voice was a low, dangerous growl, directed not at Adriana, but at her cousin. "You thought you could play me." His grip on Adriana's shoulder tightened, a silent reassurance, a declaration of ownership. "I knew." Adriana looked up at him, a gasp escaping her lips. He had known? All along? He had suspected, had allowed her cousin to believe his deception, had used it. A wave of awe, both terrifying and exhilarating, washed over her. He truly was a master strategist, cold, calculating, brilliant. He hadn't just been protecting her, he had been orchestrating a grander game, turning every betrayal, every lie, into a weapon in his arsenal. Nikolai's eyes never left the cousin's face. "Continue your game," he commanded, his voice laced with menace. "Continue to feed them your carefully selected truths. You will lead them exactly where I want them to go." Her cousin's face, so composed moments before, paled. He understood. He was no longer a player. He was a pawn, controlled by a far greater force. He was trapped. Adriana leaned back against Nikolai, her softness yielding completely to his formidable strength. Her world had been irrevocably shattered, but in its place, a new, unshakable truth had formed. Nikolai was her only anchor, her only family, her only hope. The profound loss she felt was tempered by an even fiercer devotion. She was utterly, completely, irrevocably his, and in his cold, calculated brilliance, in his unwavering command, she found not just safety, but a terrifying, beautiful sense of belonging. The air in the safe house felt thick, charged with an unspoken tension, even as the city's usual symphony of sirens and distant shouts continued outside. Adriana felt it, a low hum beneath her skin, a prelude to something monumental. The revelation of her cousin's betrayal, his cold calculation, had stripped away the last layers of her past, leaving her exposed and raw. But it had also solidified her devotion to Nikolai, forging an unbreakable bond in the crucible of truth. He was her only anchor, her only truth. And now, he was her only future. She found Nikolai in the main strategy room, a stark space dominated by a massive illuminated map of New York. He stood before it, a formidable silhouette, his broad shoulders squared, his gaze fixed on the intricate web of territories and movements. His power, always palpable, felt even more immense now, a silent, unyielding force that radiated through the room. He turned as she entered, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no need for words between them anymore, not for the small things. He knew she was ready. He knew she was his. "They want you," he stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of question. He didn't soften the words, didn't try to sugarcoat the brutal truth. It was a fact, delivered with the chilling clarity of a man who dealt only in realities. "Both sides. They believe they have the upper hand thanks to your cousin's intelligence." Adriana's breath hitched. She knew what that meant. She was the prize, the leverage, the bait. A tremor ran through her, a visceral fear of what was to come, but it was quickly overshadowed by a fierce resolve. She would not flinch, not for him. "They've proposed a trade," Nikolai continued, his gaze unwavering, boring into hers. "You for a fragile peace. Each side thinks they can use it as an opportunity to ambush the other, to finally end this war." A cold, humorless smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of the ruthless strategist beneath the protective facade. "They are predictable." He paused, stepping away from the map and slowly, deliberately, walking towards her. Each step was a measured beat, a silent declaration of his unwavering intent. As he neared, his sheer size was overwhelming, making her feel impossibly small, delicate. He stopped directly before her, his body a formidable wall blocking out everything else. The scent of cedar and steel, so uniquely him, enveloped her, a powerful, intoxicating comfort. His large hands came up, cupping her face, his touch firm, possessive. His thumbs brushed gently over her cheekbones, an almost tender gesture that belied the cold resolve in his eyes. "I will go," he commanded, his voice deep and absolute, a decree that vibrated through her. "You will be there." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a discussion. It was a statement of immutable fact, a command that swept away any thought of protest, any flicker of resistance. Her role was clear, dictated by his will, a necessary part of his grand design. And in that absolute, unwavering command, Adriana felt a strange, profound sense of calm settle over her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was held in check by the immense safety of his certainty. "I will use this," he continued, his eyes burning into hers, a fierce, possessive blaze, "to end this war, to claim you, permanently." His thumb brushed over her lips, a subtle, dominant gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "You will be mine, Adriana, undisputed, untouchable." Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, but it was a rhythm of fierce acceptance, not fear. She looked into his dark, unwavering eyes, seeing not just the cold strategist, but the man who had protected her, who had revealed his own hidden integrity, who would burn the city to keep her safe. She trusted him, completely, absolutely. He didn't ask for her opinion, didn't need her verbal agreement. Her silence, her softened gaze, the way she leaned into his touch, were all the answers he needed. She accepted her role, understanding that her presence, her vulnerability, was not a weakness, but a vital piece in his ultimate victory, a necessary catalyst for him to finally claim her and their future without compromise. Adriana closed her eyes for a brief moment, drawing strength from his unwavering resolve, from the unshakable certainty of his touch. She was a pawn in a deadly game, yes, but she was his pawn, protected by a king who would sacrifice everything to keep her. She would face whatever came, standing by his side, an emotional anchor in his storm, ready to submit to his command, knowing that in his dominance she would find her ultimate protection, her eternal safety. She was ready. The biting wind whipped strands of hair across Adriana's face, carrying the metallic tang of the East River. She shivered, but not from the cold. The deserted Brooklyn Bridge stretched out before her, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple of the night sky, its grandeur transformed into a stark, unforgiving stage. She was here, just as Nikolai had commanded, standing vulnerable in the chilling spotlight of a generations-old feud. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror, but beneath it, a strange, unyielding resolve had settled deep in her bones. She was bait, a pawn in a deadly game, yet she felt a terrifying clarity. This was the moment. This was where everything shattered, or where a new world began. On one side of the vast expanse, bathed in the anemic glow of distant streetlights, stood the Blackwood faction. Her father, a stoic, unyielding figure whose betrayal still stung like a poisoned wound, stood at the forefront. Beside him, her uncle, his face a mask of cold anticipation, and then her cousin. His eyes met hers, a flash of something unreadable, triumph, pity. Before he averted his gaze, it was a lineup of her past, a gallery of those who had used her, manipulated her, seen her as nothing more than a tool. Opposite them, a formidable phalanx of dark-suited men, unmoving, unyielding, the Russo family, and at their head, Nikolai. His presence was immediate, overwhelming, a solid, unyielding force that devoured the dim light around him. Even from this distance, she could feel the coiled power radiating from his broad shoulders, the cold, strategic intensity in his dark eyes as he assessed the scene. He was a king in his domain, and this bridge, this night, was his chessboard. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the mournful creak of the bridge cables in the wind. Then her father stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the expanse, cold and imperious. "Adriana," he called, his tone devoid of warmth, "return to your family. We offer peace, a truce for your safe return." He looked at her not as a daughter, but as property, a bargaining chip. The words were a demand, a final attempt to reclaim what he believed was his. Adriana's breath caught. The familiar weight of his authority, the ingrained instinct to obey, warred with the new, fierce loyalty that burned within her. He saw her as a possession, a transaction. But Nikolai, he saw her as something to be claimed, to be protected, to be fought for. Then Nikolai moved. He stepped forward from his side, his posture radiating coiled power, his face grim, utterly unreadable. He walked past his men, his presence growing more formidable with every stride, until he stood halfway between the two factions, a solitary, unyielding giant. "There will be no peace," he declared, his voice a low rumble, deep and resonant, carrying an absolute finality that echoed across the bridge. It was a sound of unshakable command, of power that brooked no argument. "And I will never surrender her." His gaze, dark and possessive, fixed on her, sweeping away the cold fear and replacing it with a profound, terrifying sense of belonging. "She is not yours to trade. She is mine." The air crackled. The truce shattered, dissolving into a maelstrom of raw, brutal intent. Her father's face contorted in a snarl of rage. Almost simultaneously from concealed positions on the bridge, the cousins' double ambush erupted. The Blackwood men, believing they had the upper hand, surged forward, their hands going for concealed weapons. But from hidden alcoves on the Rousseau side, more men materialized, their movements swift and practiced. Guns were drawn, knives gleamed in the pale moonlight, sparking off the cold steel of the bridge. The cousin, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer, pointed directly at Nikolai, a signal for the ambushers to converge on him. The bridge became a whirlwind of brutal, visceral chaos. Adriana gasped, her body freezing, her eyes wide with terror. The sound of a gunshot, sharp and deafening, ripped through the night. But even as chaos erupted around her, even as the world devolved into a symphony of violence, her gaze was fixed on Nikolai. He was moving, a blur of dark power, a force of nature already engaging the ambushers. And in the heart of that terrifying storm, as bullets sparked off steel and men collided with brutal force, Adriana felt an uncanny, absolute safety. He was here. He was fighting for her. And she, in that moment of utter chaos, trusted him completely to shield her from every single blow. The world exploded. The precise, calculated ambush her cousin had orchestrated unfolded with terrifying speed, turning the deserted bridge into a maelstrom of flashing steel and guttural shouts. Gunfire cracked, sharp and deafening, echoing off the metal superstructure. Men surged forward from every shadow, a wave of brutal intent, all converging on the two figures at the center, Nikolai and Adriana. Her body froze, a primal scream trapped in her throat. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the onrushing figures to Nikolai, who had moved instantly, sweeping her behind him with an arm of iron. His massive frame became her immediate, unyielding shield, a wall of muscle and resolve between her and the unleashed fury. She felt the vibrations of impacts against his back, the sharp tang of gunpowder in the air, but no direct threat reached her. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled violence. He moved with brutal efficiency, his every action precise, deadly. She glimpsed flashes of movement, the glint of a knife, the blur of a fist. Men who dared to try and flank him, to reach for her, were met with swift, devastating force. Nikolai was a strategist, yes, but he was also a warrior, a primal protector whose rage, once unleashed, was terrifying to behold. She saw him pivot, saw an attacker crumple, heard the sickening thud of a body hitting the steel deck, all without him ever fully exposing her. His focus, even in the heart of chaos, was solely, absolutely, on her safety. He was a lion defending his cub, ruthless and magnificent. The fear was still a cold knot in her stomach, a constant tremor in her limbs, but it was overshadowed by a profound, almost dizzying sense of awe. She had always known he was powerful, but this was different. This was raw, untamed might, wielded with a terrifying precision, all for her. Bullets sparked off steel railings nearby, a violent light show that illuminated his unyielding profile. He was taking hits, absorbing blows, but he never faltered, never weakened. He would not let them touch her. He would rather burn the city to the ground than let her be taken. In his absolute dominance, in his terrifying, unwavering protection, Adriana felt a safety she had never known, a deep, primal surrender blossoming within her. Slowly, impossibly, the chaos began to recede. The shouts grew fainter, the sounds of struggle less frequent. Nikolai stood over a fallen figure, his breath coming in sharp, controlled gasps, his clothes unmarked, his eyes still burning with a dangerous intensity. The bridge, moments ago a battleground, was now littered with the fallen, a chilling testament to his victory. He turned then, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing, ensuring she was unharmed. Her father, a solitary figure amidst the wreckage of his ambition, stumbled forward, his face ashen, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. The Blackwood faction lay broken, his plans shattered. "Adriana," he rasped, his voice raw, stripped of its former authority. "Come back, this is madness. Come back or you are disowned. Cast out, you will have nothing." He was offering her a life of destitution, a life without her name, without her heritage. He was still trying to command her, to control her, even in defeat. Adriana looked at him, at the wreckage of her past, at the man who had betrayed everyone, even his own daughter. Then her gaze shifted to Nikolai. He stood tall, triumphant, a silent, powerful presence, his dark eyes fixed solely on her. There was blood on the bridge, the scent of violence still hanging heavy in the air, but in his gaze she saw only unwavering protection, absolute possession. With trembling hands, but with a sudden, fierce deliberation that surprised even herself, Adriana took a step, then another. She walked away from her father, away from the shattered remnants of her family, away from the life she was meant to inherit. She walked towards Nikolai, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the bridge, each step a profound, irreversible declaration. She reached him, and he opened his arms, enfolding her in a warm, solid embrace. She leaned into him, her softness yielding completely to his formidable strength, her face pressed against his chest, hearing the steady, powerful beat of his heart. She looked up into his eyes, a silent declaration of her eternal surrender and devotion, a deep, unshakable bond forging in that moment. Her voice, though soft, rang out, clear and unwavering, across the deserted bridge, cutting through the lingering tension. "My name," she declared, her gaze locked with Nikolai's, "is Russo." It was a profound rejection of her past, a claim of her future, a vow whispered to the man who now held her, completely and irrevocably. She was no longer Adriana Blackwood, the Mafia princess in a gilded cage. She was Adriana Russo, the queen claimed by her Mafia prince, utterly safe, utterly cherished, forever protected, forever his. The biting wind still carried the ghost of gunpowder from the Brooklyn Bridge, but now, days later, the city air hummed with a different kind of tension. It was the aftermath, a silence more profound and terrifying than the battle itself. Adriana, nestled deep within Nikolai's most secure penthouse, watched the news reports with a detached understanding. The Blackwood family, once a formidable power, was crumbling. Her father, stripped of his influence and reputation, was a broken man. Her uncle, missing, presumed dead or in hiding. Her cousin, nowhere to be found, swallowed by the chaos he had so meticulously orchestrated. Nikolai, in the days that followed, was a whirlwind of cold, efficient power. The war, which had raged for weeks, was abruptly, brutally over. He moved through his empire, consolidating, absorbing, dismantling with a speed that left the city reeling. Adriana saw the reports of businesses changing hands overnight, of territories merging, of old loyalties being violently reshaped. The streets whispered of a new, formidable power, a single, undisputed ruler now commanding the vast, intricate web of the New York underworld, Nikolai Russo. The whispers were laced with fear, but also with a grudging respect for the man who had brought a swift, decisive end to the bloody conflict. Her past, the life she had been born into, was irrevocably severed. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of opulence and menace, was now synonymous with defeat. There was a profound sense of loss, a strange, hollow ache for a life that, even in its gilded cage, had been all she knew. But intertwined with that grief was an even stronger current of relief. The constant pretense, the suffocating fear of discovery, the sickening weight of her family's violence, all of it was gone. She was free of their lies, free of their demands, and in its place there was Nikolai. She was no longer his secret, his hidden lover. She was openly his consort, his queen. She moved through his world, not as a prisoner, but as a cherished figure, always under his watchful eye, always protected by his formidable presence. His men, once silent shadows, now greeted her with a respectful nod, a subtle shift in their demeanor that acknowledged her new status. She found herself responding to his commands with a natural ease, a deep-seated acceptance of his authority that felt both terrifying and utterly liberating. Her decisions were his, her safety his unwavering priority, and in that complete relinquishment of control, she found a profound, almost intoxicating sense of peace. One afternoon, Nikolai found her in his vast, impersonal library, surrounded by legal texts. He watched her for a moment, his dark eyes discerning before speaking. "You spoke of using the law to protect," he said, his voice a low rumble. "To build something real." Adriana looked up, her heart doing a familiar flutter at the sound of his voice. She still felt the size and power difference between them acutely, the way his presence could fill a room, making her feel small and delicate. "I did," she confirmed, her voice soft. He walked over to her, his large hand resting gently on her shoulder, a possessive weight. "Then do it. In my domain, you will have the freedom to build. A clinic, discreet, for those who need it, under my protection, under my name." A wave of emotion washed over her. It was a purpose, a path, a way to reclaim the dreams she thought she'd lost. She looked at him, at the unwavering strength in his eyes, at the absolute certainty of his command. She was no longer just the woman he desired. She was the woman he empowered, the woman whose quiet strength he nurtured within his formidable empire. In his absolute protection, in his guidance, she found not just security, but a profound sense of belonging, a purpose that felt more real and more powerful than anything she had ever known. She would build her clinic, her sanctuary of justice, within his, knowing that her Mafia prince would ensure its safety, just as he ensured hers. She was his, utterly and completely, and in that surrender she had found everything. If you enjoyed this story, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Tales of Power and Desire to keep up with our intense romances.